Hey everyone, Pastor George here, and for today's Theolog, I am treading into political waters, although not to talk about politics necessarily, but rather to react to some of the discussions that took place in the political space last week in regards to the Bible, within the context of the student loan forgiveness that was passed, or not passed, but I guess um, I don't know exactly how how it's described because it was an executive order, I guess. So ordered. So the student loan forgiveness that was ordered by President Biden last week, where all people who have student loans of any federal variety get forgiven for 10,000 of those, right? $10,000 of whatever their loan is. Now, the reason I think this is interesting to talk about is because, well, you can see here. I'll put it up here on my right over here. Is that you can see that like news organizations began responding to this. So just like in this one up here, right? It says, "Is student loan forgiveness biblical?" from Christianity Today, and then from the Federalist, which is a more right-leaning news source, it says, "There's nothing Christian about Biden's student debt forgiveness." And then Time, which is typically center left, said, "In opposing student loan relief, the GOP ignores scripture." The Federalist again says Joe Biden canceling student debt isn't like Jesus forgiving sins. Now, if you were just like an alien observing the political space and you just started to see all of these articles popping up, you'd probably be like, what is going on, right? I think it's interesting just on a cultural level that our culture is still very deeply Christian, that even people who aren't or may even be opposed to a lot of the church's teaching still bring up examples of the Bible and of Jesus kind of in order to make their points and things like that. And I feel that's very kind of just an interesting thing. I'm not just a kind of an interesting aside. So anyway, what ended up happening, the reason that all these articles began to be written is because people online, and maybe you saw some of this like on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, people began responding and saying, "Oh, this is the Republicans don't like this, but didn't they know that but their whole religion is built around someone forgiving them for sin and stuff like that." And then you had Republican, or I guess you could say right-leaning, whatever, people responding to that saying, "Oh no, that's not the same thing," or that's not relevant or whatever, right? So you had a bunch of political debate again taking place and people using the Bible in order to make their points, and this became a big deal because even in like outside of specifically political circles, one of the most used Bible tools online is Bible Gateway. Maybe some of you have used it. Chances are, if you just type in like John 6 into your search, like the first response is going to be Bible Gateway, and it's the website that pulls up the scripture, and you can choose from like hundreds of different translations and lots of different languages, and it's a really great tool for comparing translations and just being able to read the Bible. Wonderful. It's made it very accessible. Anyway, they can track on that website which verses people are going to the most, and like because you can quote them and send them out as tweets or stuff like that. And so they have data to show that. And these are the four verses that came up. The first is Exodus 22:25, which says, "If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest." Deuteronomy 23:19, "Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest." Psalm 37:21, "The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously." And Ecclesiastes 5:5, "It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it." And so that's right here. You can see actually how maybe people who were for student debt forgiveness saw things in the Bible that they believe helped justify that. How people who are against it saw things in the Bible that they believed helped justify their position. And so I thought it'd be interesting, not talking about the student loan forgiveness per se, but rather what the Bible says about debt and about forgiveness of debt and things like that. Because some of the other things that were brought up was like the year of Jubilee, and of course, which is a period in the Hebrew year where people, every 7 years, where people's debts would be forgiven and slaves would be set free, right? And of course, people bring up Jesus and how he pays the debt for everyone else, right? He's the one that ransoms people free from sin and death. And so a lot of different people were bringing different Christian arguments to bear, and like, what do we think about this type of stuff, right? So I think that it's interesting just to talk about it. So some of you may know this, or you may not know this, but for a long time in the Christian world, it was illegal to charge interest on any debts that anyone took out. And the reason that is because of Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy 23, where it talks about how you shouldn't charge interest on loans, right? That you can give a loan to someone else, and then that loan should be repaid, right? That's what's expected. But you can't charge interest on it, right? You don't use loans as a way of making money, and so you can't. So banking was outlawed, and that's why banking went to, and we still have stereotypes about this, obviously, but that's why banking ended up being taken over by like minority groups that weren't bound by these same rules, like Jews, and so they ended up becoming like the primary banking class in Europe during the Middle Ages, which is where we still get a lot of conspiracy theories, anti-Semitism, stuff like that. But it's rooted in this idea that Christians shouldn't charge other Christians interest, just like Jews believe that they shouldn't charge other Jews interest, right? This is because people outside the group you can charge interest to, but not people inside. And since the majority of Europe was Christian, there really were very few bankers that could, charge interest to Christians because they were also Christian, right? And so it was declared a sin even to do that. And so all that is to say, as time moved forward, people began to loosen that requirement. And so big banking houses were eventually established by some prominent families with the growth of like capitalism. And I don't mean this in like a negative way. I just mean it as a matter of fact. In the 16th, in the 15th, 16th century, 17th centuries, with like the Dutch and stuff like that, you start to get like companies, like corporations formed and stuff like that, and they need money to do their ventures. So people will loan the money, investors and things like that, right, and expect to be paid. So all that is to say is that the Christian history has like a more complicated view of it than it's easy to say, yeah, it's good or yeah, it's bad. I mean, like all of us probably in the United States have benefited from a loan at some point, even a loan with interest. I mean, if you have a credit card, right? I have a credit card. Every month I use my credit card to buy things, right? That's not my money. That's their money that I use at that moment to buy whatever I have, and then I pay it back at the end of the month, right? And of course, credit card companies are very predatory, and they'll try and make sure that you don't pay it back, or so they can get the interest payments from you. But technically, if you use a credit card, even if you pay it back, you're still taking a loan out for that amount of money, right? Or if you bought a house, you've benefited from loans, right? Because you've gotten a mortgage from a bank or something like that, and you've been able to buy a home and use the money for that. Or if you've gone to school, right, you've taken a loan out from someone else and you've been able to use it. So a lot of people, some people say, oh, we don't like loans, we don't like debt, like it's all bad. But debt kind of forms an important part of life, at least now and in our economy, in a way that it didn't back in biblical times. And so it's kind of interesting to take these things and apply it backwards, because when the Bible was established, you didn't even have things like debt in the way that we would understand it, where you use it to buy things. Usually this was like kind of a last ditch effort that you would have, where people would loan you money in order to get by or anything like that. And God condemns people in Israel who try to predatorily loan people money and charge them interest, right? Because they're all part of one family. They shouldn't be doing that to each other. And so he takes a big stance against that. But at the same time, as you can see in Psalms and in Ecclesiastes, there is also this idea that if you're lent money, you should pay it back. So you can't just run off with someone's money because that's something they gave you, and you're expected to pay it back. And if you don't do that, then that is sinful, right? So you can see already how this is more complicated, and I think all of us would agree with that, right? Like, so if you just take it in the small scale, like if I lend you $100 or you lend me $100, and I just never paid you back, as after saying I would, you'd probably be a little peeved about that. I think rightly so, because you might have given me that money for a purpose. And I think that's what the Bible's getting at, right? It's trying to hold together this unity within the people of Israel and within the church as to how we should not treat other people, right? um, and that we shouldn't try and just become money making people and try and steal things and trick each other and stuff like that. And so I think that's what all of what the Bible is teaching is more to do with that. When it comes to the broader spectrum, right, about this specific policy, I think it's worth thinking about, um, the what is the goal, or what is the point, and is it the same as these things? And I mean, for that, you can read a lot of the different articles. I mean, I personally don't think it's the same as Jesus paying back our debt for sin. I think that's a little different. But I can understand where people are going with that. I think that, like, the year of Jubilee is a somewhat better example of how debt is forgiven and slaves are freed, right? Just as a way of, again, keeping harmony within the nation of Israel, and reminding them of God's character and things like that. And the unfortunate thing is either way, in this scenario, I don't think America is in a healthy or a healthy enough spiritual place where people could do that in good conscience. And I'm not saying that, like, Americans are greedy and so they won't give up their money or anything like that. I just think that it's a time when people use this type of thing. Not, I mean, maybe some do, but I think to pretend that there isn't political motive behind something like this is a little naive. So it's used as a political cudgel to kind of win, and the other side also uses it as a political cudgel to kind of win. I think that it's kind of a shame that that's why we're talking about it, and why it's become a big deal anyway. And I would say that it doesn't, these simple arguments where we just take Bible verses and throw them don't get to the full root of the issue. So, like, other things to consider is, like, well, how does this make people who never went to college or who paid off their college loans feel about this, right? I think that if you're even for it, that's something that you have to have an answer for, right? You can't just say, oh, suck it up. Like, you should have a Christian response to that. Or if you're on the other side and people are kind of crushed under debt, what's our Christian response to that, right? Because as a millennial, and as someone who is blessed that I was able to get through school without having to take out any student loans due to all sorts of different things, I know people who end up with lots of debt, and even if they get a job, they can't really end up paying it off because schools and banks and other and the government allowed for this to happen, so it's also on our government's fault. Prey on kids who turn 18, and they get them to take out these massive loans, and they don't understand what that's going to be down the line. And I think that one side just calling them stupid for doing that isn't very helpful either. So I don't think we should cheapen the work of what Jesus did on the cross, because he himself took alone that. He didn't spread it out to the whole nation or whatever, right? But we certainly can use this as an opportunity to think more deeply about how to love people who disagree with us and try to understand their part of the argument, even if maybe we think that they might be misled, or we believe that this is the righteous thing to do, or if we believe this is the non-righteous thing to do. We still need to be able to respond to the needs that people have, and how we do that with biblical counsel is very important. And so that's all I wanted to talk about. I kind of said a lot and then said nothing at the same time, because I want you guys to make up your own mind on this. You can go out and read these articles. The Christianity Today one is very good, and I'll link it in the description below, because it gives 3 different voices and their thoughts on it. So you have people who are for it, people who are against it. And I think that's the most helpful way of encountering this, because at least this way you get to hear the other side's opinion on it, and it's in a neutral. Well, in a neutral space for Christians, I think CT is a fairly good one. So I'm going to link that below. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you guys tomorrow for our Bible study recap and Thursday for our mailbag. You have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and peace out.